Well, there I am, back in the hot tub, when who should walk through the door but Larry, yet again. This time we sat down and talked. I've talked to Larry before. He's an older fella, hard conservative. Most of his ideas, his thoughts, his beliefs are conservative in nature. He votes conservative. He's fully on the right wing. He's absolutely happy to repress anybody in society that doesn't fit his image of what should be allowed to exist. And as we were talking, he just sort of randomly brought up transsexuals and transgender people. He said, I don't believe in trans. I was perplexed by this. I said, what do you mean you don't believe in it? And he said, I don't believe in them. I don't believe that they are trans. I don't believe in what they think. I said, well, Larry, you understand that there are people in the world that don't feel comfortable in their bodies, right? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, and there are some men that feel more comfortable dressing up like women or behaving like women, and there are some women that are more comfortable dressing and behaving like men, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, and you're also aware that some people have ambiguous gender at birth, that their chromosomes are ambiguous, or that they have multiple X's and Y's or different configurations, and that their genitalia is different. Sometimes it's both or one or the other, and it shouldn't be, or it's kind of a mix. And he said, well, yeah. And I said, well, then you believe in trans. I said, it doesn't make any sense to say you don't believe in trans. All those people exist. I said, that's like saying you don't believe that homosexuality exists. I mean, you are aware that there are men that prefer the company of men and women that prefer the company of women, or just people that prefer the company of their same sex or gender, right? That they're attracted to and want to couple with those folks and nobody else. And he said, well, yeah. And I said, and they exist, right? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, then what are you talking about? And he says, well, they have an agenda that I don't believe in. I don't think it's okay to be trans. I said, really? I said, okay, well, what happens when your group says it's not okay to be a white male? And he just laughed because his group is white males. He said, well, that's not going to happen. And it's kind of similar to when Christians say, well, God would never do that. God would never tell me to kill a child, even though he told a bunch of people in the Bible to kill a child. And I think what God said in the Bible is just and moral because God said it. And so all those children that God killed, they needed to die because God said so. But God would never do that to me. God would never say that today. Very similar, that notion. Larry then went on to say that too many people are becoming trans, and he thinks it's a fad. And I said, well, Larry, you were here for the changing of the social narrative as it pertains to homosexuals, right? Like, you remember before homosexuals were socially accepted and after homosexuals were socially accepted, right? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, don't you remember that during that transition, it seemed like awful lot of people were coming out as homosexual because it was now socially acceptable to be homosexual? And he went, yeah, actually, there were a lot of, and he used faggot. He likes that word. He said there were a lot of faggots all of a sudden becoming, they seem to be everywhere. He doesn't seem to have a problem with lesbians, by the way, or dykes, as he calls them, but he did say something about gay men. And I said, well, Larry, it's just the same thing. I said, once society gives the okay that you're allowed to be these things and that we're not going to beat you or kill you or put you in jail or whatever, then people who are trans feel comfortable expressing the fact that they're trans. And he said, yeah, I don't think that that's true. And this really speaks to how much denial is intertwined in conservative thought. We're going to get into that in another episode, another level of denial, but this denial is really palpable. You can witness transgenderism or transsexualism. You can witness people experiencing gender dysphoria. You can do a lot of things to understand that community. You can go online and watch YouTube channels, ContraPoints, and, well, ContraPoints is the main one that I'm aware of. But there's a lot of different trans content out there, a lot of art being produced, a lot of media, a lot of propaganda, a lot of normalization and acceptance of trans communities. And that's all you really have to do is go and engage with it and find yourself empathizing. Find yourself understanding who those folks are and why they are the way they are and how they experience the world and what their claims are. And it's just as sound as your claim to heterosexuality. But the conservative doesn't care about that. They see change and progress as an erosion of society. You see, a conservative thinks that us white male types, we were in charge for a really long time. In fact, we could just sell off our children, daughters mostly, back in the old days. But now, we can't even do that. I can't even sell my daughter for a dowry. I can't enslave my wife. I can't have more than one wife. I can't have a concubine. That's not cool anymore. This sucks. I'm losing all the advantages I had. Society's falling apart. And notice how wherever we see religious sects and conservative sects expressing themselves to the extreme, it seems to always turn into that weird, creepy space where they have a harem of some kind. I've said it before, you can hear conservative thought about what a family is and whether or not a wife can divorce a husband. You can go to Louder with Crowder and hear him talk about it as a gun-toting, hardcore conservative bigot. You can go on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert and hear him joke about it with other Catholic guests. It reminds me of the scene in A Bronx Tale where Sonny locks the door and says, "Well, now yous can't leave." How do the women of these men feel about this idea that they can't leave, that they don't have any say in the matter? But that is very conservative, that idea. So to a conservative, all this change represents a loss of power. It's change, it's progress from the way things used to be when Christian men were in control. It's progress to a place now where everybody has a voice and a say. So if you're trans and you want to get married and raise children, well shit, that means you're a family. And to a conservative, the lowest common denominator of society is a family. But it has to be one man and one woman. So what is this trans family? And what about the children? We got to think about the children. A conservative person doesn't believe in this trans agenda to, have families and children. That's my space. That's what a conservative thinks. That's something for conservatives, not for these trans people and their agenda. It's interesting to me that the trans people just want to live happy, healthy lives and often want to do exactly the same things that conservative people want to do. They just want to do it in their own way. And conservatives, their heads just explode. They say things like, well, I don't believe in trans. When you ask them what they mean by that, they fall flat on their face, of course. But what they mean is I'm bigoted against trans people. I want control over what a family is and isn't. I want the benefits that society provides to families, and I want to deny those benefits to trans people. Oh, and by the way, trans aren't even people, according to conservatives. They dehumanize trans people by saying, that's not a family, you can't procreate, so on and so on, dehumanizing this group of people so that they're unrecognizable from what they consider the animal kingdom. They're not involved or included in a conservative's version of society because they're not human. Now, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. A conservative person would never say this out loud. They would never admit to this. They might say it in certain private circles or settings. They might think it. They might write about it. They might blog about it. But they would never admit this to me. They would never admit to this in public. That's part of how conservatism works. They use dog whistles and they obfuscate and they use propaganda and they redirect and they deny and they do all kinds of things in order to maintain some power in society without just openly dehumanizing and debasing whole sections of it. That's how they get people from the center to come over to their side. You can start to empathize with a conservative when you see how nice they are to their children or how nice they are to their family members, their brothers and sisters. It's the part where they hate everybody who isn't in that group and want to debase them and exclude them from societal benefits, like we talked about with homeless people and so on. That's what turns off the center. But they don't say that in the public sphere. They don't openly say stuff like that. They dog whistle instead. Well, I think I have some more stories about Larry, but those are for another day, another episode. I want to thank you for listening. This has been Hot Tub Monologues.